The first time my brother realized I owned the Mercer Lake house, he stopped breathing mid-sentence. Not literally, but his mouth stayed slightly open while his eyes moved across the property documents like his brain couldn't process what he was reading. Around us, the entire private dining room had gone silent. The soft piano music, the clinking wine glasses, even the waiters pretending not to stare. Gone. My mother looked pale enough to faint. And, suddenly, for the first time in my life, nobody at that table seemed embarrassed of me anymore. Funny how quickly respect appears when money enters the room. Just 30 seconds earlier, Grayson had been making jokes about my diner job. Now he couldn't even look me in the eye. His fingers tightened around the envelope. Then he whispered something I never thought I'd hear from my older brother. "You own all of this?" Before I answer that, welcome back to Calm Drama Episodes. If you enjoy emotional family stories with shocking twists, quiet revenge, and satisfying endings, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. I always love seeing how many different places these stories reach. Now, let me tell you how my own family spent years laughing at the daughter working 2 jobs, while having no idea what I was secretly building behind their backs. I didn't answer Grayson immediately. Because honestly, after years of humiliation, exhaustion, and pretending their cruelty didn't hurt, I wanted him to sit in that silence for a moment. I wanted all of them to, especially my mother. Vivian Mercer had spent most of my adult life introducing me like I was some unfortunate family situation people weren't supposed to ask about. This is Arabella. She's still figuring things out. She works a lot. Life's been hard for her. Like I was a charity case instead of her daughter. Like exhaustion was some kind of personality flaw. But the worst part? She always sounded embarrassed by me. Not angry. Embarrassed. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from realizing your own family sees you as evidence of failure. And the terrifying thing is, eventually, you start seeing yourself that way too. For years, I thought maybe if I worked harder, things would change. Maybe if I stayed quiet long enough, sacrificed enough, survived enough, they'd finally respect me. Instead, they turned my struggle into family entertainment. Especially Grayson. My brother had a talent for making insults sound charming. That's why people liked him. At family gatherings, he'd throw his arm around my shoulder and grin while saying things like, "Bella's keeping the diner industry alive single-handedly." Everyone would laugh. And I'd laugh too. Because when people repeatedly humiliate you in public, eventually you learn performing comfort is easier than explaining pain. But nobody at that dinner knew what those 2 jobs had actually paid for. Nobody knew how many nights I spent reviewing property tax records at 2 in the morning after double shifts. Nobody knew how many buildings I'd quietly saved from foreclosure. Nobody knew the black diner apron folded inside my tote bag had financed almost everything sitting inside that envelope. And they definitely didn't know my father planned it that way. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the truth is, the Mercer family started breaking long before that envelope ever arrived. Long before the Manhattan Steakhouse. Long before the silence. Long before Grayson's hands started shaking. It probably started the day my father got sick. Or maybe earlier. I was 28 years old now, but some mornings still felt exactly the same as they did 10 years ago. Like this morning. My alarm went off at 4:37 a.m. Not 4:30. Not 4:45. 4:37. Because somehow those extra 7 minutes made me feel less miserable. Outside my apartment window, Stamford was still dark and wet from overnight rain. I sat up slowly, my neck aching from falling asleep on the couch again while reviewing contractor invoices. For a few seconds, I just stared at the ceiling. My body already felt tired. That was the dangerous thing about working 2 jobs for years. Eventually, exhaustion stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling like your personality. I pulled myself up, grabbed my coffee from the kitchen counter, and opened the small hallway closet beside the door. My black diner apron hung neatly from a hook inside. I hated that apron for years. Not because of the job. Because of what people saw when I wore it. Failure. Struggle. Embarrassment. At least that's what my family saw. Especially my mother. The previous Sunday, during brunch at Vivian's lakefront house in Greenwich, she'd watched me arrive straight from my cleaning shift wearing plain black slacks and exhausted eyes. Grayson noticed immediately. Of course he did. He leaned back in his chair with that effortless confidence people mistake for intelligence and smirked. Careful, everybody. Bella's dressed like she's about to ask if we want sparkling or still water. The table burst into soft laughter. Not loud laughter. Worse. Polite, wealthy people laughter. The kind designed to humiliate you without technically being cruel. Vivian lowered her wine glass slowly. Then came the sentence I couldn't stop replaying in my head all week. I honestly don't know why she still lives like this. Like this. Not works like this. Lives like this. As if struggle was some embarrassing lifestyle choice I refused to outgrow. And sitting there at that long marble dining table while everybody avoided eye contact. I remember realizing something that scared me. Nobody there expected me to become anything else. The strange thing about favoritism is that nobody in the family ever admits it exists. They call it different personalities, different needs, different strengths. But children always know, even when nobody says it out loud. I think I realized Grayson was my mother's favorite the Christmas he got a BMW for his 17th birthday. Not because of the car. Because of the way Vivian looked at him when he opened the keys. Proud. Certain. Almost relieved. Like he had become exactly the kind of son she wanted people to see. Meanwhile, I was 16 years old wearing a department store sweater that still had the security tag attached because my mother forgot to remove it before wrapping it. When I quietly pointed it out, she sighed and said, "Well, you can exchange it yourself later." Then she went right back to admiring Grayson's reaction. Little moments like that don't seem important individually, but years of them pile up inside you, like tiny invisible bruises. Growing up in Greenwich meant appearances mattered more than most people admitted. Families competed quietly there. Whose children attended better schools? Whose husband made partner first? Whose daughter got engaged before 30? Whose son worked on Wall Street? And Vivian Mercer treated parenting like a public relations campaign. Grayson fit the image perfectly. Tall, confident, athletic, naturally charming. People loved him within minutes of meeting him. I used to envy how easily the world opened for him. Teachers adored him. Neighbors praised him. Even waiters laughed harder at his jokes. Meanwhile, I was quieter, more observant. The kind of person people accidentally talked over at dinner tables, which became useful later. Quiet people notice everything. Like how my father's expression changed whenever Vivian bragged about Grayson. At the time, I didn't understand it. Now I do. My father loved Grayson. But he trusted me. There's a difference. When I was 19, my father got diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Everything changed after that. The Mercer family stopped pretending money solved every problem. Hospital visits replaced vacations. Medication schedules replaced dinner parties. And for the first time in my life, I watched Vivian lose control of something. Illness didn't care about appearances. I was the one who started staying overnight at the hospital. Not because anyone asked me to. Because someone had to. Grayson still visited, of course. But his visits felt scheduled. Efficient. He'd show up in expensive jackets carrying coffee for everyone, hug my father, promise to handle anything we need, then leave 40 minutes later for networking dinners or client meetings in Manhattan. And somehow everybody still praised him endlessly. Grayson's under so much pressure. He's doing his best. Your brother has such a big future. Meanwhile, I was sleeping in plastic hospital chairs and showering inside family waiting rooms before morning classes. Nobody called that sacrifice. They called it availability. One night around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my father struggling to breathe. Machines beeped softly in the darkness while rain hit the hospital windows. I remember pressing the nurse call button with shaking hands. After things stabilized, he looked exhausted. Older than I'd ever seen him. Then he motioned weakly for me to come closer. His voice barely worked anymore. Your mother thinks Grayson understands responsibility, he whispered slowly. But responsibility looks different when nobody's applauding you for it. I didn't know what to say, so I just held his hand quietly. A few minutes later, he asked me something strange. Have you ever been to Cedar Hollow? I frowned. Upstate? He nodded slightly. There's a blue filing box in the office closet there. His breathing sounded uneven. If something happens to me, don't let them sell anything before you look inside. At the time, I assumed the medication was confusing him. Cedar Hollow was one of the older Mercer rental properties near Albany. I barely remembered visiting as a child. But the way he looked at me that night stayed with me. Not scared. Urgent. As if he was trying to hand me something invisible before time ran out. 3 months later, he died. And grief changed our family faster than I thought possible. The funeral itself looked beautiful. That's the thing about wealthy families. Even their tragedies are aesthetically organized. Black umbrellas. White roses. Perfectly tailored grief. People filled the church praising my father's business instincts and generosity, while Vivian accepted condolences like a politician at a campaign event. Grayson stood beside her greeting investors and family friends with polished composure. I mostly stayed quiet. Exhaustion had hollowed me out by then. But sometime after the burial, while everyone gathered at Vivian's lake house for the reception, I went upstairs looking for aspirin. That's when I saw her. Vivian. Inside my father's office. Shredding documents. At first, she didn't notice me standing there. Stacks of papers covered the desk. Property folders. Tax records. Bank envelopes. And beside her feet sat 3 large storage boxes already taped shut. Then she looked up suddenly. For 1 second, actual panic crossed her face. Not grief. Panic. She slammed one drawer closed too quickly and forced a smile. You startled me. I stared at the boxes. What are you doing? Her expression hardened immediately. Handling things your father should have organized years ago. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. Go downstairs, Arabella. That was the first moment I realized something inside this family was being hidden from me. And deep down, I think Vivian knew I'd eventually figure it out. By 28, I had learned how to survive on autopilot. Wake up. Work. Smile. Repeat. That was my life. Most mornings started before sunrise inside the downtown Stamford office tower, where I worked cleaning executive suites before employees arrived. The building smelled like expensive coffee and polished marble floors. By 6:30, men in tailored suits would start stepping out of elevators while staring at stock reports on their phones. Most of them never looked directly at me. Not really. I was just part of the background. Like the trash bins. Or the vacuum cleaner. Sometimes I wondered if invisibility became easier for people once money taught them certain jobs only existed to serve them. Around 11, I'd rush home to shower before my second shift at Blackwell's Chop House, an upscale steakhouse near the waterfront where wealthy clients spent more on wine than I spent on groceries each month. That job paid better. It also destroyed me faster. Rich customers had a particular kind of cruelty. Not loud cruelty. Effortless cruelty. Finger snapping. Ignoring eye contact. Talking over you while you poured water. One man once asked me if I ever planned on doing something bigger after noticing I worked lunch and dinner shifts back to back. I smiled politely and refilled his bourbon. Because humiliation loses its sharpness eventually. Not completely. Just enough for you to function through it. By the time most people were getting home from work, my feet usually felt numb inside my black non-slip shoes. I kept painkillers in my apron pocket beside my order pad because the migraines had become almost routine. Stress headaches, the doctor called them. As if giving them a softer name somehow made them less exhausting. But no matter how tired I felt, Sundays were always worse. Because Sundays meant family. Vivian hosted brunch almost every week at the lake house in Greenwich. The dining room overlooked the water through massive glass windows that my father once loved. After he died, the house started feeling colder somehow. Like grief had settled permanently into the walls. I almost skipped brunch that week. My double-shift Saturday night had turned into nearly 14 hours after 2 servers called out sick. I slept maybe 3 hours before driving to Greenwich wearing black slacks and a cream sweater that still smelled faintly like steakhouse smoke, no matter how many times I washed it. The moment I walked inside, I knew Grayson was already in one of his moods. You could always tell by how loud everyone laughed around him. He stood near the kitchen island holding court in a navy sweater and Rolex watch while telling some story about a luxury condo deal in Manhattan. Vivian looked proud. Of course she did. The second she noticed me, her eyes moved subtly across my outfit. Assessing. Calculating. Disappointed. You look tired, she said instead of hello. I forced a smile. Long weekend. Before she could answer, Grayson glanced over and smirked. Careful, Mom. Bella probably spent all night serving truffle fries to finance her billionaire lifestyle. Laughter floated across the kitchen. Not harsh. Almost affectionate. Which somehow made it worse. Because nobody there thought they were being cruel. That's the dangerous thing about families like mine. They turn disrespect into tradition. I grabbed coffee quietly while pretending not to care. Years earlier, I might have defended myself. Now, I just got tired. During brunch, conversation revolved around investment properties, private schools, and vacation homes in Nantucket. I mostly stayed silent while picking at scrambled eggs I wasn't hungry enough to eat. Then Vivian's friend Cynthia arrived late. Perfect hair. Diamond bracelet. Expensive perfume that filled the room before she even sat down. The moment she saw me, she smiled politely. Arabella, right? What are you doing these days? I opened my mouth to answer. Big mistake. Because Grayson leaned back in his chair immediately. Still working 2 jobs. Soft chuckles circled the table. Cynthia blinked awkwardly. Oh. That tiny little "oh" somehow hurt more than the jokes. Pity always did. Vivian sighed dramatically while buttering toast. I honestly don't understand it. We gave both our children the same opportunities. Silence. Nobody challenged her. Not even Grayson. And the terrifying part was, after years of hearing that version of reality repeated enough times, part of me almost started believing it myself. Maybe I really had failed somehow. Maybe exhaustion was my fault. Maybe I simply lacked whatever invisible quality made people successful. Then I remembered the overdue tax notices sitting inside my apartment desk drawer. The ones connected to 3 Mercer rental properties nobody in this family even thought about anymore. Properties my father built before Grayson was born. Properties drowning in unpaid taxes and legal penalties. I hadn't told anyone about them yet. Mostly because I didn't fully understand why the notices were addressed to an LLC I'd never heard of. Mercer Holdings Group. The name appeared repeatedly across county documents I'd spent nights researching after work. At first, I assumed it was some accounting mistake. Until I realized something stranger. Every property connected to those debts had once belonged to my father personally. And somehow, ownership had shifted shortly before his death. I barely heard the rest of brunch after that realization resurfaced in my head. The laughter around the table started sounding distant. Muted. Like my brain was somewhere else entirely. Then Grayson made one final comment while scrolling through his phone. You know what Bella needs? A rich husband. Cut the workload in half immediately. More laughter. Even Vivian smiled into her wine glass. And suddenly, something inside me changed. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly. Because sitting there listening to people mock the very jobs keeping me alive, I realized none of them had ever actually asked how I was surviving. Not once. Not my mother. Not my brother. Nobody. Then my phone vibrated beneath the table. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. But something made me answer. A calm male voice spoke immediately. Miss Mercer? This is the Fairfield County Clerk's office. We've been trying to reach you regarding the Cedar Hollow property filings. My stomach tightened instantly. Because I hadn't mentioned Cedar Hollow to anyone in years. Not since the hospital. Then the man said something that made the entire room around me disappear. There are ownership documents here with your name attached to them. I stayed in my car for almost 20 minutes after that phone call ended. The Mercer Lake house sat behind me glowing with warm golden light while laughter drifted faintly through the windows. Inside, my family was finishing brunch. Outside, my hands were shaking against the steering wheel. Ownership documents. With my name attached. I replayed the county clerk's words over and over, trying to understand how any of it made sense. Because according to Vivian, my father's properties had either been sold, transferred, or handled years ago. That was always her favorite word. Handled. As if every question in this family disappeared neatly inside paperwork nobody else was allowed to see. Rain tapped softly against the windshield while I opened the email the clerk had forwarded to me. 3 attachments. Property tax notices. Trust filings. Ownership transfers. And there it was again. Mercer Holdings Group, LLC. I stared at the documents until my eyes blurred. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. Managing member. Arabella Mercer. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because exhaustion does strange things to your brain when reality stops making sense. I barely remembered driving home after that. The entire way back to Stamford, one thought kept circling inside my head. Why would my father attach my name to property holdings without ever telling me? Unless, maybe he had tried. The memory hit me instantly. Hospital room. Rain outside the windows. His weak voice. Don't let them sell anything before you look inside. The blue filing box. Cedar Hollow. Suddenly none of it sounded confused anymore. It sounded deliberate. That night after my diner shift ended, I sat cross-legged on my apartment floor surrounded by printed documents, unpaid utility bills, and takeout containers I was too tired to throw away. My tiny apartment smelled like coffee and exhaustion. Outside, Stamford traffic hummed faintly through the walls while I searched county property databases on my laptop until nearly 2 in the morning. That's when I discovered the truth. Or at least the beginning of it. My father hadn't lost the Mercer properties before his death. He had protected them. Quietly. Strategically. And apparently, secretly. Over several years, he'd transferred multiple rental properties into Mercer Holdings Group through layered trust structures connected to Cedar Hollow. But after his death, unpaid taxes started piling up fast. Legal notices. Penalties. Liens. Thousands and thousands of dollars. Which meant one terrifying thing. Vivian had known the properties were collapsing financially. And ignored them. I leaned back against my couch staring at the ceiling while a migraine pulsed behind my eyes. None of this made sense financially. The Mercer family wasn't poor. Not even close. Vivian still hosted charity luncheons. Grayson still leased luxury cars. The lake house still looked untouched. So where was the money going? That question kept me awake longer than the caffeine. The next morning before work, I drove 2 hours north to Cedar Hollow. I hadn't been there since childhood. The property sat near Albany, surrounded by old maple trees and quiet country roads that looked frozen in time. My father used to bring us there during summers before everything in our family became about appearances. Back when Grayson and I still laughed together. Before money became personality. The rental office building looked abandoned now. Peeling paint. Cracked gutters. Overgrown grass. For a second, grief hit me so hard I had to stop walking. Because I suddenly remembered my father fixing these buildings himself. I remembered paint stains on his jeans. The smell of sawdust. The way tenants waved at him like he mattered. He loved these properties. Not because they made him look rich. Because he built them. Inside the office closet, behind broken filing cabinets and old contractor boxes, I found the blue filing case. Exactly where he said it would be. Dust covered the lid. My hands actually trembled opening it. Inside were asterisk property deeds, asterisk handwritten notes, asterisk trust documents, asterisk tax schedules, asterisk repair records, asterisk and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in my father's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The letter inside was short. Painfully short. Arabella. If you're reading this, Then I ran out of time. Your mother and brother see success differently than I do. Grayson chases appearances. You protect things. That matters more. The properties were never meant to be sold. They were meant to survive. So were you. Dad. I read the letter 3 times. Then I cried for the first time in years. Not loudly. Just quietly there inside that dusty office while afternoon sunlight came through cracked blinds. Because for the first time in my life, someone in my family had finally seen me correctly. Not as disappointing. Not as weak. Not as the daughter who failed. But as someone dependable. Someone trusted. And somehow that hurt almost more than the years of humiliation. Because my father had known exactly what would happen after he died. He knew Vivian and Grayson would chase status, while everything underneath quietly collapsed. And he knew I'd stay. Even if nobody thanked me for it. Especially then. The next several months became brutal. I worked both jobs while secretly handling legal filings, tax negotiations, contractor meetings, and restoration permits tied to the Mercer properties. Most nights, I slept 4 hours at best. I learned how to negotiate payment plans with county offices during lunch breaks. I reviewed plumbing invoices while eating protein bars in my car between shifts. I stopped buying almost everything except necessities. Meanwhile, Grayson posted vacation photos from Aspen. Vivian hosted another fundraiser. And every Sunday, they continued treating me like the struggling embarrassment of the family. The irony became almost unbearable. One afternoon, after paying nearly $8,000 toward overdue property taxes, I sat inside the Fairfield County Records office waiting for updated filings. An older clerk behind the counter studied the paperwork quietly before glancing at me. Most families let inherited properties go once things get complicated. I looked down at my father's signature on one of the documents. Then answered softly. My father built these himself. The woman nodded slowly like she understood something deeper than money. Then she handed me the finalized ownership transfer forms. And for the first time, I saw my name officially attached to something my family never believed I could build. The first property I fully saved was a 6-unit brick building in Bridgeport. Nothing glamorous. Old radiators. Cracked sidewalks. Tenants who paid rent late because life had hit them harder than expected. But when I stood outside that building holding the finalized paperwork in my freezing hands, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt capable. Not successful. Not accomplished. Just capable. Which honestly mattered more. Because my family had spent so many years treating me like I was barely surviving that I almost forgot I was strong. Almost. The building still needed repairs, of course. The roof leaked during heavy rain, and 2 units needed new plumbing, but it was producing income again. Steady income. Enough to slowly stabilize the other Mercer properties. Every extra dollar from my diner shifts went directly into restoration costs. While Grayson bought watches, I bought water heaters. While Vivian hosted wine tastings, I negotiated electrical contracts during my lunch breaks. Nobody knew. And after a while, I stopped wishing they did. That was probably the saddest part. At some point, I gave up hoping my family would suddenly understand me. I just wanted peace. But families like mine don't let struggling people exist quietly. They need someone beneath them. And unfortunately, that person had always been me. The Women's Harbor Foundation Gala happened in early October at a private yacht club overlooking Long Island Sound. Vivian had been planning it for months. Every conversation became about centerpieces, donor lists, seating arrangements, and which families would attend. She treated charity events like Olympic competitions. Winning meant looking wealthier than everyone else while pretending humility. 3 days before the gala, she called me while I was cleaning conference rooms downtown. You're coming Friday, correct? I balanced the phone between my shoulder and ear while emptying trash bins. I work Friday night. Silence. Then came the sigh. The disappointed mother sigh. Arabella, sometimes you need to prioritize appearances. Appearances. Of course. Not family. Not relationships. Appearances. I should have said no. Instead, I traded shifts and lost almost $200 in tips I desperately needed. By Friday evening, I was already exhausted before the gala even started. The yacht club looked exactly like the kind of place Grayson loved. White marble floors, champagne towers, soft jazz, men discussing investments near the harbor windows. Everyone there seemed professionally successful. Or professionally pretending to be. Vivian wore an ivory gown with diamond earrings my father bought before he got sick. Grayson stood beside her charming donors like he'd been born inside country clubs. Then there was me. Black dress. Simple heels. Hair pulled back because I barely had time to get ready between shifts. The moment I walked in, I saw Vivian's expression tighten slightly. Not anger. Assessment. Like she was mentally calculating whether I fit the image she wanted tonight. That look never stopped hurting. Even after all these years. There you are, she said quietly. Try to mingle a little tonight. Translation. Try not to embarrass us. I nodded anyway. The first hour passed exactly how these events always did. People asked Grayson about commercial real estate. People complimented Vivian's fundraiser planning. People barely remembered my name. Honestly, I preferred it that way. Invisibility can feel peaceful after enough humiliation. Then I made the mistake of standing near Grayson's group while grabbing sparkling water from the bar. One of his clients smiled politely at me. "And what do you do, Arabella?" Before I could answer, Grayson laughed lightly. "Bella's basically keeping the service industry alive." The group chuckled. One woman tilted her head sympathetically. "Still doing the two-job thing?" Still. That word again. As if my entire existence was some temporary phase everyone expected me to outgrow. I forced a small smile. Something like that. Then Grayson added the sentence that stayed with me for weeks. "She works harder than anybody I know and somehow still loses financially." Honestly, it should be studied. More laughter. Soft. Comfortable. Cruel. And the worst part? Nobody there thought he sounded mean. That's how normalized my humiliation had become. Before I could walk away, an older woman carrying wine approached me suddenly. "Excuse me, sweetheart," she said warmly. "Could you check on the appetizer trays near the patio? We're missing shrimp cocktails." For a second, I didn't understand. Then realization hit. She thought I worked there. Because of the black dress. Because of how invisible I looked standing beside wealthy people. My face burned instantly. Before I could respond, I glanced toward Vivian. Surely she'd correct her. Surely. Instead, my mother smiled politely into her champagne glass and said nothing. Nothing. That hurt more than the mistake itself. Because silence can humiliate you louder than insults. The woman eventually realized the misunderstanding and apologized awkwardly, but the damage was already done. I spent the next 20 minutes hiding near the outdoor balcony overlooking the water, trying to calm the pressure building behind my eyes. Cold October air hit my skin while laughter echoed from inside the ballroom. And standing there alone, I suddenly remembered something my father once told me while repairing a sink at Cedar Hollow. People who build things rarely look impressive while they're building them. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Now I did. Because while Grayson entertained investors inside, I had spent that morning finalizing ownership transfer paperwork for the largest Mercer property yet. A 12-unit apartment building in Stamford. The projected valuation alone made my stomach turn. Not because of greed. Because for the first time, I realized the Mercer portfolio was becoming something massive. Something real. Something mine. And nobody inside that ballroom had the slightest idea. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number again. I almost ignored it. Almost. But the second I answered, a nervous male voice spoke quickly. "Miss Mercer? This is Callahan and Burke Law Offices. We've been attempting to contact Vivian Mercer regarding the trust review." Trust review. My chest tightened instantly. Then the lawyer said something that made my blood run cold. "There are discrepancies involving several property transfers. And legally, your signature appears to control all of them." By the time Vivian's 60th birthday dinner arrived in December, I was running almost entirely on caffeine and adrenaline. The Mercer properties had consumed every part of my life. Mornings cleaning offices, afternoons answering contractor calls, evenings waitressing, late nights reviewing trust documents and repair estimates at my kitchen counter while eating microwave noodles at 1 in the morning. I was exhausted constantly, but for the first time in years, I wasn't scared anymore. That was new. Somewhere between the tax negotiations, ownership transfers, and sleepless nights, I'd stopped seeing myself as the struggling daughter my family described. I still worked 2 jobs, still wore the black apron, still counted grocery prices before checking out. But internally, something had shifted. Because secretly carrying responsibility changes you. Especially when the people mocking you have no idea you're the reason everything around them still exists. Vivian's birthday dinner was held at L'Oran Prime, a high-end steakhouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The kind of place where waiters moved silently and nobody looked at menu prices. Grayson had organized the entire thing. Of course he had. To him, events were performances. And tonight's performance was about presenting Vivian Mercer as the elegant matriarch of a successful family. The private dining room glowed with candlelight and gold decorations by the time I arrived directly from my cleaning shift in Stamford. I'd changed clothes in the employee restroom before driving into the city, but exhaustion still clung to me like smoke. The second I walked inside, I felt underdressed. Not technically, emotionally. Everyone else looked polished, rested, expensive. I looked like someone who had spent the last 4 years surviving. Vivian noticed immediately. Her eyes scanned me quickly before she forced a tight smile. Arabella, you made it. Not, you look nice. Not, I'm glad you're here. Just, you made it. Like attendance itself was surprising. I hugged her anyway. Because despite everything, part of me still kept trying. The room buzzed with conversation while relatives and family friends sipped wine beneath soft jazz music. Grayson stood near the center of it all confidently discussing real estate markets with 2 investors. I almost laughed at the irony. If they only knew. One of the investors spotted me first. Arabella, right? He asked politely. What line of work are you in? Before I could answer, Grayson grinned. Bella's out here single-handedly carrying the American workforce. Several people laughed immediately. I forced a small smile and reached for water. Then he added, seriously though, 2 jobs at 28? That level of financial struggle should qualify as an Olympic sport. More laughter. Soft. Comfortable. Affluent. The kind of laughter that reminds you successful people often confuse cruelty with humor. I stared down at the condensation sliding along my water glass. Smile. Nod. Survive. That had become instinct. Vivian shook her head dramatically from across the table. I honestly don't understand how 2 children raised in the same home ended up so differently. There it was again. That sentence. The one designed to sound concerned while quietly assigning blame. Across the room, someone chuckled awkwardly. Another person avoided eye contact completely. Because deep down, people always know when something cruel is happening. They just rarely interrupt it. Dinner service started shortly afterward. Wine poured. Steaks arrived. Conversations drifted between vacation homes, investment portfolios, and private schools. I barely spoke. Not because I felt ashamed anymore. Because I suddenly felt disconnected from all of them. Like I was watching strangers perform versions of themselves they desperately wanted others to believe. Halfway through dinner, Grayson leaned back in his chair holding a whiskey glass loosely. You know what I admire about Bella, he said loudly enough for the table to hear. No matter how hard life gets, she never quits. For one brief second, I thought maybe he was being sincere. Then he smiled. Mostly because she literally can't afford to. The room exploded with laughter. Even Vivian laughed into her wine glass. And strangely, that was the exact moment something inside me went completely calm. Not angry. Not hurt. Just finished. Because suddenly I realized they needed me to stay small. My struggle made them feel successful. My exhaustion made them feel accomplished. And if I ever stopped being the disappointing daughter, they'd have to confront who they actually were. That realization settled over me seconds before the dining room door opened. At first, nobody paid attention. A man in a charcoal gray suit stepped quietly inside holding a large certified envelope. Professional, careful, uncomfortable. Restaurant staff immediately looked nervous. The man scanned the room once before speaking. I apologize for interrupting. I'm looking for Miss Arabella Mercer. Silence. Real silence. My stomach tightened instantly. Slowly, I raised my hand. That's me. The man approached the table carefully while every conversation in the room stopped around us. I noticed Vivian's face change immediately. Color drained from her expression so fast it genuinely frightened me. Grayson frowned slightly. What is this? The man ignored him. Miss Mercer, this delivery was scheduled under delayed instruction authorization connected to the Mercer Holdings Trust. Trust. The word hit the table like shattered glass. Vivian sat perfectly still. Too still. The man placed the thick envelope carefully in front of me. Then added, "It was ordered to be delivered personally on your father's 60th birthday. There were delays due to litigation review." My father's 60th birthday. Not Vivian's. Suddenly I couldn't breathe properly. Because my father should have been sitting at this table tonight. Instead, all that remained of him were documents and unfinished warnings. Grayson reached for the envelope first. "This some kind of legal issue?" he asked lightly. But his voice sounded tighter now. Nervous. I looked toward Vivian. She wouldn't look at me. That scared me more than anything else. Then Grayson laughed quietly and tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. "What is this, Bella? Another overdue bill?" A few weak chuckles surfaced around the table. Nobody fully committed this time. The energy had changed. People sensed something. Slowly, Grayson opened the envelope. At first, his expression stayed casual. Then confused. Then pale. Paper after paper slid across the white tablecloth. Asterisk deeds. Asterisk trust certifications. Asterisk ownership filings. Asterisk tax clearances. Asterisk appraisal statements. Asterisk operating agreements. The room became so quiet I could hear silverware clink against plates 3 tables away. Grayson flipped through the documents faster now. His forehead tightened. One investor beside him leaned closer suddenly. Then blinked hard. Wait. More pages. More silence. Finally, Grayson stopped moving completely. His whiskey glass sat untouched beside his hand while his eyes locked onto one appraisal document. I watched his entire expression collapse in real time. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like someone realizing the world they understood wasn't real anymore. Then he looked up at me slowly. For the first time in my life. My brother looked intimidated. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "You own all of this?" Nobody answered Grayson immediately. Not me. Not Vivian. Not anyone sitting around that table. The silence itself became the answer. I watched my brother stare down at the appraisal documents again, like maybe the numbers would change if he looked long enough. $6.8 million. Apartment buildings. Retail properties. Rental units. Trust holdings. Properties Grayson had probably driven past 100 times without realizing they belonged to me. The irony was almost cruel. Because Grayson built his entire personality around understanding real estate. He talked about market trends the way some people talk about religion. Investment strategy. Property leverage. Luxury developments. Meanwhile, the exhausted sister he mocked at brunch had quietly rebuilt an entire portfolio behind his back. Or maybe not behind his back. Just outside his attention. There's a difference. One of the investors beside him cleared his throat awkwardly. These filings are legitimate? The lawyer who delivered the envelope nodded once. Everything has been verified through probate review and trust execution. Probate review. Trust execution. Legal language always sounds so emotionless considering how much damage it can do. Across the table, Vivian still hadn't touched her wine. Her hands sat folded tightly in her lap. Too tightly. For years, I'd imagined what this moment would feel like. I thought maybe I'd feel victorious, powerful, satisfied. Instead, mostly I felt tired. Because no amount of money can erase years of being treated like you were fundamentally less valuable than the people around you. And the saddest part? They only looked at me differently now because paperwork told them to. Grayson swallowed hard before flipping to another document. Then another. His breathing changed slightly. That's when he found the Cedar Hollow records. I recognized the exact second because his entire posture shifted. Confusion became realization. Wait, he said quietly. These properties were almost foreclosed? Nobody spoke. His eyes moved rapidly across the pages. Tax liens, payment schedules, restoration filings. All under my name. All paid. Slowly, his face lost color. Because now he wasn't just seeing ownership. He was seeing responsibility. The kind he'd spent years pretending belonged naturally to him. One of Vivian's friends finally broke the silence. Arabella, why didn't you tell anyone? Such a simple question. But it landed strangely. Because underneath it was another question entirely. Why didn't you defend yourself? I looked down at the black cloth napkin folded across my lap. For a second, I thought about every humiliation leading to this room. Every joke. Every comparison. Every fake sympathetic smile. Then I answered honestly. Nobody asked. The room went silent again. Not dramatic silence. Heavy silence. The kind people sit in when the truth exposes something ugly about them. Vivian finally looked at me directly. And for the first time in years, she looked uncertain. Not disappointed. Not judgmental. Uncertain. Arabella, she said carefully, we didn't know any of this was happening. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because of course they didn't know. They never looked closely enough to know anything about me. They saw exhaustion and assumed incompetence. They saw 2 jobs and assumed failure. Nobody ever stopped to ask why I was working so much. Or where the money was going. Or why I looked half dead all the time. Because wealthy families often confuse appearances for truth. If someone looks unsuccessful, they must deserve it. Grayson kept flipping through documents. Faster now. Almost frantically. Then suddenly he stopped again. His eyes locked onto the final property listed inside the trust portfolio. I knew which one before he even spoke. The lake house. Vivian noticed too. I watched actual fear cross her face. Real fear. No, she whispered softly. Grayson looked up slowly. The lake house is part of the trust? I answered quietly. It always was. The room shifted instantly. Because now this wasn't abstract wealth anymore. Now it was personal. The Mercer Lake house wasn't just property. It was identity. Family reputation. Holiday dinners. Charity events. Inheritance. Vivian's entire social image was connected to that house. And suddenly she realized something terrifying. She didn't control it. Grayson stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Honestly, maybe he hadn't. Because people rarely notice the person carrying weight quietly in the background. They only notice once the weight disappears. One of the appraisal papers slid slightly across the tablecloth as Grayson lowered it slowly. His voice sounded smaller now. Less polished. How long have you known about all this? I thought about the hospital room. The blue filing box. The sleepless nights. The diner shifts. The migraines. The contractor meetings between double shifts. Then I answered. Long enough. Nobody spoke after that. Not even Vivian. The waiter entered awkwardly to clear plates, but immediately sensed the tension and retreated without saying a word. Outside the private dining room windows, Manhattan glowed against the dark river while expensive cars moved silently through the streets below. Inside, the Mercer family was finally confronting something none of them expected. Not money. Truth. And truth is dangerous in families built on performance. Because once people see you clearly, they start remembering every moment they chose not to. Then Grayson picked up one final sheet from the envelope. A notarized trust amendment dated 3 months before my father died. His eyes narrowed while reading. Then slowly, very slowly, he looked up at Vivian. Mom. Something in his voice changed completely. Dad didn't leave this to Bella by accident. Nobody at the table moved after Grayson said it. Not even Vivian. The entire room felt suspended in something heavier than shock. Recognition. Because deep down, they all understood what my father's decision actually meant. Trust is personal. And my father hadn't trusted appearances. He trusted me. Grayson stared at the notarized amendment again, his jaw tightening slightly. Then he read part of it aloud quietly. Primary operational authority shall remain with Arabella Mercer due to demonstrated long-term responsibility regarding property preservation and tenant management. His voice faded before finishing. The sentence hung in the room like smoke. Demonstrated responsibility. Not potential. Not charisma. Not image. Responsibility. I watched Vivian carefully. For years, my mother treated success like something visual. Luxury cars. Country clubs. Perfectly tailored children smiling at charity galas. But my father apparently measured people differently. And suddenly Vivian was being forced to confront that difference publicly. One of the investors shifted uncomfortably beside Grayson. Your father was preparing this before he passed? I nodded once. I think he knew the properties were in trouble. Grayson looked up immediately. Trouble? I almost couldn't believe he still didn't understand. Then again, why would he? He never handled any of it. Never saw the unpaid tax notices. Never sat inside county offices negotiating penalties. Never spent nights reviewing contractor invoices after 14-hour shifts. To him, properties were status symbols. To me, they were survival. I leaned forward slightly. 3 buildings were weeks from foreclosure when I found the records. That finally broke something in Vivian's composure. Why didn't you come to me? She asked sharply. The question hit me harder than I expected. Because underneath the anger was something else. Guilt. I held her gaze calmly. Would you have listened? Silence. That answer told the truth better than any argument could. Vivian opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again. Because we both knew the answer. No, she wouldn't have listened. Not to the daughter she spent years dismissing. Across the table, Grayson kept reading through the trust paperwork more slowly now. Like every page forced him to reevaluate memories he thought he understood. Then he stopped at a stack of payment records. My payment records. His forehead tightened. You paid these yourself? I nodded. No point hiding it anymore. The room grew quiet again as he flipped through page after page of tax payments, restoration expenses, legal filings, and repair contracts. Every sacrifice documented neatly in black ink. Thousands of dollars. Years of work. And suddenly all those family jokes about my 2 jobs sounded uglier in retrospect. Because while they laughed at my exhaustion, I was quietly saving the foundation beneath their lives. Grayson leaned back slowly in his chair. For the first time maybe ever, he looked genuinely ashamed. Not embarrassed. Ashamed. And somehow that felt worse. Because anger would have been easier. Then Vivian spoke again, softer this time. Your father never told me he changed the trust structure. I studied her face carefully. There it was. Not just shock. Hurt. Because I think part of Vivian truly believed she understood my father completely. But grief reveals uncomfortable truths about marriages too. Sometimes people love each other deeply while still seeing the world entirely differently. My father built things quietly. Vivian displayed them beautifully. And somewhere along the way, they stopped understanding each other. The realization seemed to hit her all at once. Not just that I owned the properties, but that my father had seen me differently than she did all those years. Maybe even more clearly. Then Grayson looked at me again. His voice sounded smaller now. Human. Bella, why didn't you ever say anything? I thought about that carefully before answering. Because the truth was complicated. Part pride. Part exhaustion. Part fear. But mostly, because after years of being underestimated, silence became safer than hope. So I looked down at the trust documents spread across the white tablecloth and answered honestly. After a while, I stopped thinking any of you wanted to know me. Nobody at the table tried to joke after that. The energy inside the private dining room had changed too completely. Dinner plates sat half-finished. Wine glasses untouched. Even the Manhattan skyline outside seemed strangely distant now. For years, my family controlled conversations through performance. Charm. Humor. Status. But truth ruins performance, especially when it arrives documented. Grayson stayed unusually quiet while the lawyer gathered several remaining papers from the envelope. He looked exhausted suddenly. Older somehow. Like confidence had finally collided with reality. Vivian barely spoke at all. She sat staring at the trust amendment while her fingers rested lightly against the edge of the tablecloth. Then softly, almost to herself, she said, "I thought I was protecting this family." Nobody answered immediately. Because intentions become complicated once damage is visible. I understood what she meant. Vivian spent her entire life believing security came from image. Appear successful. Appear stable. Appear respected. Maybe she truly believed pushing Grayson towards status while dismissing me as the hardworking daughter was somehow practical. But favoritism changes children quietly. One becomes entitled to admiration. The other learns to survive without love. And survival changes you too. Eventually, people stop expecting kindness altogether. The lawyer excused himself a few minutes later, leaving the envelope behind on the table between us like evidence from a trial nobody wanted. Grayson finally looked at me again. No smirk this time. No polished confidence. Just discomfort. "You should have told me you were struggling with all this." I almost smiled at the irony. Because even now, he still thought the tragedy was my struggle, not their blindness. I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate. I wasn't struggling, Grayson. I was working. That sentence seemed to hit him harder than anger would have. Across the table, Vivian's eyes filled slightly for the first time all night. Not dramatic tears, just quiet recognition. And honestly, that hurt more than the humiliation ever did. Because suddenly I could see it clearly. My family never truly hated me. They just underestimated me for so long that eventually they stopped seeing me at all. And now, sitting in that candlelit dining room surrounded by documents my father trusted me to protect, they finally did. 3 weeks later, I stood alone outside the Cedar Hollow office building while snow fell softly across the empty parking lot. The repairs were finally finished. Fresh paint covered the walls. New lights glowed warmly inside the rental office. And for the first time in years, every unit on the property was occupied. I unlocked the front door quietly and stepped inside. The old blue filing box still sat on the shelf behind my desk. I never moved it. Some things deserved to stay exactly where they were found. My phone buzzed softly in my coat pocket. A message from Vivian. "Dinner Sunday? Just family this time." I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking the phone again. Not because I was angry. Oddly enough, I wasn't anymore. But forgiveness and closeness are not the same thing. Some wounds heal into distance instead. A few minutes later, another message appeared. This time from Grayson. "I drove past the Bridgeport building today. Dad would have been proud of you." I read that one twice. Then slowly, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked around the office my father once built with his own hands. For years, my family saw the black diner apron as proof I was failing. But they were wrong. That apron paid overdue taxes, saved buildings, protected tenants, preserved my father's legacy. And somehow, while everyone else was busy laughing at the daughter working 2 jobs, I became the one quietly holding the entire family together. And that's the end of Arabella Mercer's story. A story about quiet sacrifice, family expectations, and the painful realization that sometimes the people closest to you only recognize your value after the world does first. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next emotional drama episode. And before you go, comment below. Do you think Arabella should ever fully forgive her family? I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, let me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing seeing this community from all over the world. Thank you for spending your time with me. And I'll see you in the next story.